Are you a DM, new or experienced, who dreads having to improvise? Have you already watched a dozen videos on improv as a DM and are sick of hearing about yes and? Are you looking for how to improvise rather than being told to just do it? Well, then you're in the right place. I've got you covered. Welcome to GM Philosophy, where we empower DMs and GMs to run and enjoy running the best games that they can. I'm JW, the DM, one of the philosophers, and like so many DMs, as it turns out, I'm a trained actor who's done some stuff. No, you probably haven't seen me in anything. I'm not credited as JW or John Robinson in anything, so step back from IMDb. Also, despite doing some improv training, I was worse at it than many non-actors doing the same training, so you'll be fine. I've got to start off with saying that improv can be scary. Not just from a performance point of view, but as DMs, we need to be able to spin content that makes sense with the tale that has been set up, aligns with where we think and hope the session is going, and is engaging for our players. Not to mention making up and playing the occasional NPC right on the spot. No pressure. Just to make it sound scarier, if we DMs, GMs ascribe to player agency, that is, letting the players have their characters do anything imaginable that is possible, then there is absolutely no chance that we won't have to improvise nearly all of the time, at least to some degree. While you're here, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe as well. It really helps us out. Better yet, when you hit subscribe, hit the bell icon, notifications, and set it to all. Now, before I can get into the nitty-gritty and ways to practice, let's start with the mindset you'll want to have to succeed at improvising as a DM. First, realize it's just like being a player, just more of it. There is absolutely no material difference between what the players are doing improv-wise and the DM. Except that the DM also adjudicates what happens as a result of something being attempted. You may not have guessed it, but players aren't only improvising when they're talking in character. Describing what they're doing and how they're thinking is improvising too. They're coming up with that stuff in the moment. They are always role-playing, which means they're always improvising. Second, players forgive almost anything. The players know that you aren't Matt Mercer or Matt Colville. So whether you're a veteran or a brand spanking new DM, you are probably not a professional voice actor or improv artist, and you probably have an entirely different style for running games in the first place. Your players know this, and they totally don't care. They also expect you to screw up from time to time, but since they're screwing up from time to time too, they'll let it pass. They're not there to judge your performance. They're there to make pretend with their friends. Third, players want you to succeed so much that they'll believe you're succeeding even when you think you're bombing. In fact, some of this blindness is a result of how badly they want you to succeed. There's a psychological bias term for this, the endowment effect. It's when, by owning or associating yourself with something, you perceive its value to be higher. For instance, when people buy a car, the act of having made that commitment and now owning that car biases them to the value of that car. There's also the expectation bias where, for example, if people compare the tastes of an expensive wine and a cheap wine and know which is which, they always think the expensive wine tastes better, even though they like the cheaper wine better in a blind taste test. You are the expensive wine, my friend. You are the car. By accepting you as the DM, They've invested you with value that they will continue to believe unless something truly awful happens. And I'm telling you right now, if you're watching this video on this channel, doing something that awful is not likely to happen. Not only do they want you to succeed, they're already primed to believe you are succeeding. So take a load off your shoulders. Now, I'm not leaping into the how-to or exercises just yet, but here's the first thing that may help you with improvising as a GM. Take on the persona of the GM you are. Sometimes, depending on who you are, you might find it easier if you pretend to be someone who can improvise. This is true of being a DM or GM in the first place. You may not want to be your normal self at the table. Sometimes playing the role of a GM makes doing the work of a GM easier. I use this trick all the time. Now, players get to improvise just one character and their stuff and what they're doing at a time. They're rarely, if ever, asked to improvise descriptions of things and places. They are, however, co-creating the story with the DM. DMs, on the other hand, have, in addition to story, two kinds of improvisation that they're doing. One, creating and describing places and things and monsters, and two, role-playing NPCs, in addition to creating and describing them, sometimes on the fly. These, while different in the details, are fundamentally the same, but there are slightly different tricks to use to make each type easier. One more bit of stuff to consider before the what you need and how to and practice exercises. People have different levels of comfort and skill with how they get ready to be able to improvise. And this is why improv for DMs, and players too, isn't the same as theater improv. Here are the 3 ways different DMs set themselves up for improvising during a gaming session. 1. No prep at all. These are the people who prefer a complete and total 100% sandbox campaign where there generally isn't an overarching narrative of any sort. It takes a special table and a special DM to be able to provide this kind of game. It's not for everybody. Despite the hype it gets by having a bunch of books and blogs on the subject of no prep DMing, and the insistence that all players love 100% sandboxes, I haven't found that to be true at my tables. In fact, I've found most people like at least a little narrative and direction as long as they're not being driven down an outright railroad. All of my players have wanted about 50-50 balance between the two extremes, in fact. If you're a no-prep DM, you probably are already comfortable with the improv you're doing, and quite honestly, what are you doing here? Just kidding. Even if you're already comfortable with improv, you can always find ways to improve your craft. Number 2, moderate prep. This is the best route for the vast majority of DMs and GMs, and most published adventures are set up in a way that presumes you'll be getting familiar with things and improvising off that material. Getting only a certain amount of detail, usually enough to provide a narrative structure but not so much to cause railroading, keeps most people happy. I recommend this course. Think of using an outline or bullet points to riff off of rather than making everything up completely or knowing all the details of everything. This is why published materials generally provide short paragraphs for rooms and encounters. Your job is to fill in the blanks. 3, lots of prep. This is me. It's probably the fault of the acting tradition I was trained up in, but I like to know as much as I can about whatever I think the characters are likely to encounter in the next session. Yes, I don't try and figure out everything about an entire world beforehand, but I like to know as much as I can about what I think could happen in a session. If you plan to go this route, It's a lot of extra work, and you'll find that you don't use 90% of what you came up with, and you'll still have to improvise the majority of the session. But I find all that prep work helps me improvise better. There's a saying that President Eisenhower said about military preparation: plans are nothing, planning is everything. So while most people improvise well from an outline or the info in a published module, I do my best improv by having a great feel for how the world will respond when the players inevitably go off script. Unless you can make a lot of time in your schedule and you enjoy creating simply for the act of creating, knowing that no one will see most of it, then I wouldn't recommend this. Now, I'll tell you what improv for a GM really is. It's role playing, not professional improv. Remember, players are role playing the entire time, and they are using the same creative muscles you use to create and describe that world in the first place. Coming up with and describing an object is not materially different than a player coming up with and describing what their character is doing. Playing an NPC, however, is exactly like how players play their characters, just with a much smaller amount of prep work and detail, and sometimes none at all. It's collaborative writing with your players. It's just like preparing or writing the adventure, except that you have no time to edit yourself. Speaking of writing, you make something up on the fly. Except that instead of writing it down, you say it out loud first. Make up and say out loud a description of it. Then, when the characters react to what you just said, you don't write down how the world reacts. You say out loud how things respond to how your players responded to what you last described ad infinitum. You're just leaving out the writing and editing part. Here's your first exercise. Finally, prep an entire session without stopping to rethink or revise what you've come up with until you are done. Then you can go back and redo and revise parts. Do this as many times as you have to feel like you can maybe do something similar in front of your players in the actual game. You'll find that even if you're still uncomfortable doing it in front of your players, it'll still be a lot easier to do. Remember, this works because improvising places and objects and the like is the same as planning and outlining these places and objects, etc., but with more detail and without editing. You'll also find that you do still have time to think and take quick pauses to figure things out and what to say next. It's not like stuff is coming out of thin air, after all. You're responding to what the players did and where and to what and to how. So giving your brain a couple seconds to process the response is totally understandable. In fact, notice your players are often pausing to think up what they're going to do or say. You can too. It's not theatrical improv. You can take a moment. Here are a few things that you might need to have and do and know to improvise effectively as a DM GM. First, have the right materials and supports at hand if you need them. The adventure module campaign book, if you're using one, just put sticky notes on the pages and passages that you may need to refer to quickly. 2, have random tables, whether from books or created yourself, ready if you need them. A lot of no preppers use these, but I find them handy even as a prepper. 3, have your notes at hand. That one's a no-brainer. Use a version of them where the info is bullet pointed or similar. Maybe use sticky notes or flags or a digital tool like Notion or Obsidian so you can quickly find the info you need. Have notes ready about things like the general atmosphere and theme of a place and the objects and monsters and NPCs that will likely be encountered or nearby. Important. Don't feel like you can't reference your notes in the middle of improvising. You totally can, and your players will let you. Just try not to do it all session long. Number 4, definitely, absolutely take notes. No pressure, but whatever you say is now either canon outright or at least the saying of it is canon. The genie is out of the bottle. If you said something important as an NPC or described something important as a DM, write it down. You never know if that bit of lore will be important later or if your players will remember it or not. Number 5, stat blocks. Assuming you plan on having a possible combat encounter, you'll need to have stat blocks for those NPCs and monsters at the ready. You may even need to have either a physical or digital book or online resource to quickly bring up stat blocks for NPCs or monsters that you totally didn't see coming so that you can quickly access them. I also highly suggest using Mike Shea's Forge of Foes Monster Statistics by Challenge Rating Table. Link in the description for super quick creation of CR appropriate monsters on the fly. Don't forget, you can always reskin an existing monster and your players will probably never know. Describe something that makes sense thematically for where the PCs are, and then just use the other stats to run the encounter. Easy peasy. 6. Consider having a quick reference for the rules, like a DM screen at hand. This is optional for experienced DMs, but newer DMs should probably have a screen or online equivalent somewhere. Then you can focus on improv rather than having to try and keep certain rules in your head. By the way, I still use a screen, but it's one that I've personalized over the years and no longer includes a lot of the basic stuff. So you experienced DMs, these are still handy. 7. Know your micker. This one isn't so much something physical to have on hand or something to do as it is a requirement to know internally. Know the micker of your game. Micker, M-I-C-R, stands for Most Important Core Rules. For any 5e game, including Dungeons & Dragons, that's combat. You don't have to know every in and out of combat or even the rest of the rules, but know the basics and be familiar with the rest. 8. The main mechanic. Do you understand the main mechanic of the game? For 5e games, that's rolling a d20 against a target number, adding or subtracting a bonus or penalty. With just that information, you can make rule judgments on the fly. I'm going to let that sink in. And then look up the real rule after the game session. 9. Take cues from your players. When the players have stated their interest in something, or their characters have, or they're dropping potential lore that can be used, use it. Here's an example. One of my players' characters was being interrogated or something. I honestly can't remember now. And when asked a particular question, he said something about a brother. One of the other players asked, "He's got a brother?" And the original player and I both in unison said, "He does now." Other players have outright asked about things, characters have dropped clues or been described as doing things that led to complete quests or even spun off into campaign goals. 10. Secrets and clues. A great tool for improv is to use Mike Shea's Secrets and Clues. I'll put some links into, his videos and blogs about this in the description. Essentially, they're hooks or information or both that can help move the story forward, but are not forced to be delivered by any particular NPC or object or whatnot. Now, that's not to say that all secrets and clues and hints are my addition, need to be free of association with NPCs and places and objects, but that many can and should, so the PCs can encounter and learn them from wherever they go and whatever they encounter. Try to have 5 to 10 potential secrets and clues for each session. Some of these may be unused ones from previous sessions. Secrets and clues and hints can also provide hooks for complete Sandbox campaigns, since in most of those, some level of semi-narrative story or mini-narrative emerge. Just a quick thought about places and objects, too, is that these can also reveal secrets and clues. 11. The next bit is pretty standard advice. And yes, and I know that it's not the most actionable for practice, which is why it's here with things to know, have, or do. I just hinted at what it is, by the way. It's still important to work on. Yes, and, which means when a player says something, rather than saying no or ignoring it, you say yes, and something else that builds on it. Very traditional theater improv stuff. Here's an example. Your player asks, "Does the axe have any runes on it?" And you come back with, "Yes, and it's vibrating as well." Now, doing this without having any prior improv experience is a little overrated, especially for a beginner, but you should be aware of it and bring it into your improv as much as you can until you're comfortable with it. You're likely to have consciously worked on allowing player-created or player-suggested things to be a launching point for you to create whatever you improv next with yes and. Then there's also no but. Unlike yes and, no but is underrated, but it is tricky. It helps dealing with unrealistic expectations and requests from players, but doesn't quash their ideas entirely. Just be careful not to use any form of no, including no but, as a way to railroad the story. You'll have to be relatively quick on your feet to come up with the alternative to what your player wanted or suggested, the but, if you will. But you can pause for a few seconds to think about it, and the players won't mind. Try to use it sparingly. Once you're comfortable with yes and no but, there are variations for you to be aware of and eventually use. The two most obvious are yes but and no and. There's also things like yes maybe if X is true, etc. Now it's time to discuss playing NPCs, since it's a little bit different to improv/perform an NPC than it is to describe places and objects. So here are some quick thoughts. An NPC should want something, like to live, to talk to someone, to make money, to take over the throne, etc. If you have time to review this NPC in prep, ask yourself, what are the likely ways this NPC is going to try and do that thing? In addition to wanting something, what might they reveal? This goes back to secrets and clues and hints. Well, the answer might be nothing, or you can't think of one to use on the fly at the moment of playing that NPC. It's good to have a general idea of something they might know and say. So again, keep your notes handy. Exercise 2. Have some stock NPC traits. Make a few personas that you can embody. You don't even need to change your voice or anything, except maybe to imply male or female or somewhere in between, depending on your own gender identity. Happy Pride Month, everybody. Use inspiration from TV and movies. If you do want to use voices, maybe consider these: heroic, villainous, manipulative, innocent, everyday, sneaky, and upright. But really, they can be whatever you want and as many as you want. Just don't get bogged down trying to cover every base imaginable. If you use these generic personas for all of your NPCs, seriously, the players won't care and maybe won't even notice. They don't expect you to be a professional voiceover actor who can remember what voice they used for every character, so just have a stock few to use. Now, for the exercises for practice. These are the real beginner how-tos. 1. Tell yourself stories that you're going to make up on the spot, but don't revise it as you go along. It's the earlier suggested practice of creating without stopping and editing or writing it out. While creating a session or a campaign is a great time to practice, you can also do this with anything you see or think up at any time, anywhere you are. For example, you may see a hummingbird outside your windshield on your way to work and make up a story about why that hummingbird was out there near your car and where it goes next and why. This is a great practice that doesn't require you doing it in front of your players. 2. Work on creating short-ish, efficient but engaging descriptions, putting in 1 to 3 details about each thing described in your story. Make them tangible, as in, use some of the 5 senses to create the details, the smell of iron or decay, the rough feel of the stone, etc. 3. Pretend to be characters from fiction. This may help you build up your collection of NPC personas that I talked about earlier. Keep them in mind and use them as archetypes for NPCs. Practice them when you're alone and ignore when you totally don't sound like them. You don't need to. It's more about getting into character. 4. Here's my favorite, but I know not everyone can do this. Do you have kids? Know some kids, especially younger ones? Read them books and get into the characters. Make up stories for them. This is really good practice if there are some kids available and you have the time. Just don't be the creepy old person. 5. Describe objects and places, both already created in the real world and imaginary things you're making up on the spot. When you're creating an adventure is a perfect time to practice, but so is when you're making up stories. And practice making them short, sweet, and effective. 1 to 3 descriptors per thing described and make them tangible. We discussed that earlier. 6. Lastly, say what the situation is with conviction. I don't have a specific exercise for this. You'll just have to incorporate saying stuff with conviction while you're doing the other exercises. Whether you're coming off as a complete fool or an absolute genius, and either is acceptable, by the way, as long as everyone is having fun, the braver you are, the better everything will come off. When you do it, I guarantee you'll think so too. Now, humor is going to happen when you improvise. Most of the time, you won't know what your brain is going to suggest and what's going to come out of your mouth. Inevitably, some of it will cause some laughter. Embrace it. Even if you're running a nitty-gritty, super grim game, embrace it. Even those genres have moments of humor, and if everyone's having fun, that's the most important thing. I hope this video gave you some good stuff to think about and some actually actionable ways to practice these skills without just jumping in front of your players. If you found any value in it whatsoever, or if you're just feeling kind and generous, give the video a like, hit the subscribe button, and set notifications, that's the bell icon, to all. Join the GM Philosophy Discord channel. We've got an amazing community there where Josh, the GM philosopher, and a crew of fantastic leaders and moderators have made the place exceptional for DMs, GMs, both new, experienced, and old veterans. And while I'm one of the philosophers here, I have my own channel that you can check out. Link is in the description. Once again, I'm JW the DM. This is GM Philosophy. Thank you for watching, and may all your games be full of glory. Till next time.